far better. We expect rapid improvements. We're closely monitoring air quality and won't hesitate to take further action. She's right, we must tackle rogue operators who blight our communities. That's why we've boosted Environment Agency funding by £188 million, alongside tough new rules on incinerators and commercial fly tippers.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
If I may, Mr. Speaker, Sir Roy Stone served 13 chief whips and prime ministers from Margaret Thatcher to Boris Johnson, and I'd like to pay tribute to his extraordinary service and send my best wishes to his family. And also, before we start, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say to the Prime Minister how horrified I was to hear about the attack on his family home. It is completely unacceptable, and I think I speak for the whole House when I say that this wasn't just an attack on him, but on all of us and on our democracy. Yesterday, we learned that unemployment is up 10% since the election. Why does the Prime Minister think unemployment is rising on his watch?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to Roy Stone as well and the service that was given us in various capacities. Can I thank her for her words about the attacks on me and my family and the kind messages from many others in the last few days. She did actually message me pretty well straight away, and I really do appreciate that. And she's absolutely right that this is an attack on all of us, on democracy and the values that we stand for. Mr. Speaker, she comes here every week to talk the country down. We've got 200,000 new jobs, record investment, 4 interest rates cut. Contrast that to the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget, inflation through the roof and a £22 billion black hole.
I'm not sure the Prime Minister even knew that unemployment was up, but there's no point him blaming everyone else. The fact is, Conservatives reduced the deficit every year until the pandemic, more than doubled the personal allowance. We left 4 million extra jobs, tackled the post-pandemic inflation spike, and left the fastest-growing economy in the G7. Let's talk about what is happening today. Let's look at Beales, a 180-year-old department store in Dorset. They survived 2 world wars and the winter of discontent, but they couldn't survive this Labour government. Beales is having, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, a Rachel Reeves closing down sale. What does the Prime Minister have to say to all the people who have lost their jobs?
Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see job losses, but she must be the only person left in the country who thinks the economy was booming after the last government. We've created new jobs, record investment, trade deals that they tried. The India deal, I think they tried for 8 years and failed. We did that deal. They talked about a US deal. We did that deal. We tend to get a stronger relationship with the EU. The former Trade Minister must be the only former Trade Minister who's against all trade deals which boost our economy. She says she's against the India deal, even though it's got the same provisions she put on the table. She's against the US deal, even though it saves thousands of jobs in car manufacturing. And, Mr. Speaker, most absurdly, she says she's going to rip up the EU deal when she hasn't even seen what's on the page. They're reduced to a brain rot. A once great political party is sliding into brain-dead oblivion.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to welcome his tiny tariff deal, but the fact is, it has put us in a worse position than we were in March. He should not over-egg the pudding. Let's talk about how things are getting worse now. In every month of this year, household names like Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda and Santander have cut staff. The ONS estimates that there are 100,000 fewer jobs than a year ago. And this was before his jobs tax, which will make things worse. Can the Prime Minister promise the House that by this time next year, unemployment will be lower than it is today?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think she just said a tiny tariff deal. Can I suggest that she gets the train to Solihull, yes, exactly. 2 hours, goes to speak to the workforce at JLR, their families and their communities, to tell them she would rip up the deal that protects their jobs. And when she's done that, she might travel across to Scunthorpe and tell the steelworkers there she's going to rip up the deal that saves their jobs. And then if she's got time, go up to Scotland and talk to the whisky distilleries. Tell them she'd rip up the deal that's creating 1,200 jobs for them, boosting their exports, and then come back here next week and tell us what reaction she got.
So I didn't hear a promise to get unemployment down, and that's because he knows things are going to get worse. And this goes wider than businesses. Last week, I met staff and patients at Farley Hospice. They do fantastic work, but they need to find an additional £250,000 to pay the jobs tax. How does he suggest Farley Hospice, a charity which relies on donations, pays for his tax hike?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have provided £100 million boosting for the sector, and children and young person hospitals received £26 million funding this year. But, Mr. Speaker, she turns up every week to carp from the sidelines. But what she doesn't do, she moans about what we had to do in the budget to stabilise the economy. But she hasn't got the courage to stand there and say that she would reverse the next decisions that we take. And I know why. It's because she doesn't want to say she's against the £26 billion investment in our NHS. She doesn't want to say she's against the £1.2 billion more for our police. She doesn't want to say she's against the £3.2 billion more for our schools. All the time she doesn't have the courage of her convictions. It shows that her criticism is totally confected.
Mr. Speaker, I can't believe the Prime Minister is still using this figure. We had this very conversation at the dispatch box. He knows it is just capital spending. It's either he's not paying attention or he is saying things to disguise what is going on. That money will not pay for the jobs tax. He knows that, and the hospices know it too. And the other people who know that things are getting worse are the 5 leading business groups in the UK. They say that his so-called employment rights bill will be deeply damaging to growth. Does the Prime Minister accept that they are right, or does he believe that he knows better than business?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Tories. Every time better rights for workers are on the table, they vote against them. Respect and dignity and protection at work are good for workers, good for the economy, and good for growth.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to listen to business. You cannot have employment rights without employment. Labour always forgets that it is not government that creates growth, it is business that creates growth. And businesses are closing, and they are blaming him and his Chancellor. There are 100,000 fewer jobs, Mr. Speaker. Hospices, charities, nurseries, they are facing bills from the jobs tax that they cannot afford. Even the unions say workers are being thrown on the scrap heap. And all of this before his unemployment bill makes hiring even more expensive. When will he admit that Labour isn't working?
Mr. Speaker, she says we should listen to She should listen to business.
I will have the last... Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she should listen to business. They're in favour of our trade deals. The India deal, fantastic deal. Tariffs on cars cut to 10%. Whisky and gin, tariffs halved. £4.8 billion into our economy. What does she say she'd do with the India deal? She wants to rip it up. The US deal that saves thousands upon thousands of jobs. What does she want to do? She wants to rip it up. The EU deal, good for our economy. She's not going to even wait to see what it says. She absurdly says she's going to rip it up. It is so unserious. She even was reduced last week to calling the Indian government, accusing them of fake news. No wonder she did so badly as a Trade Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the project for them is over. They're sliding into oblivion. They're a dead party walking.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of British jobs have been safeguarded by this government's trade agreement with the US. Including those in my constituency who work for Jaguar Land Rover, like my next-door neighbour Ollie, proving that when Labour negotiates, workers win. Can the Prime Minister confirm to me that he will continue to stand up for all workers and our vital motor manufacturing industry as he negotiates a better deal for Britain around the world?
Well, can I pay tribute to her for her work with JLR, standing up for the jobs in her constituency? The deal that we've agreed saves thousands of jobs in our car industry, securing the livelihoods of countless families. And, Mr. Speaker, I've been up to JLR on a number of occasions, including last week. I know firsthand what it means for their workforce, for their families and for their communities. And the Leader of the Opposition says she would go and tell them she's going to rip it up. She should go up there. She says she's going to get against it. The Reform leader said, what did he say about JLR? He said JLR deserves to go bust. Shame on him. Labour are striking deals in the national interest.
The Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of my party, can I offer heartfelt congratulations to His Holiness, Pope Leo XIV? And can I offer our support to the Prime Minister and his family after the appalling arson attacks on his home? And can I echo his thanks to our brilliant police and firefighters? Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, the previous government was faced with a choice. Their own Migration Advisory Committee told ministers that recruiting more care workers required improved conditions, career progression and better pay. But the Conservatives chose not to do that and instead brought in large numbers of care workers from overseas. Now, those carers looking after our loved ones in care homes should be thanked, not demonised. But will the Prime Minister do now the things the Conservatives refused to do, starting with a higher minimum wage for carers?
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank him for his comments about myself and my family? I do really appreciate it. It is important that we have fair pay for care workers, and that's why we've put in place our fair pay agreements. This is the first of its type. It will be applied first to care workers to ensure that they get fair pay, but also a better framework for progression. As he will know, most people leaving care work are leaving care work to go to the NHS because of the pay and the ability to progress. Our fair pay agreements will deal with that to make sure that in the future those jobs are more secure. And I would just add, Mr. Speaker, a declaration of interest. My sister is a care worker. I know firsthand how important the work is and how difficult sometimes the situation is facing them.
Sir Ed Davey.
For that reply, it's a good first step, but we'll still be seeing people earning more in Amazon warehouses and supermarkets than care homes, and that will mean our loved ones going without the care that they need. But turning to the Middle East now, Mr. Speaker, for more than 10 weeks, Israeli forces have blocked food, water and medicine getting into Gaza. There is now a humanitarian catastrophe with 2 million people at risk of famine and 1 in 5 facing starvation. Rather than ending this crisis, the Netanyahu government is planning to seize all Gaza indefinitely. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree that the blockade to Gaza should end, and I'm sure he would agree that it would be appalling if Netanyahu proceeds with that escalation. But will he act now and pick up the phone to President Trump for a joint plan to recognise Palestine and get food, water and medicine into Gaza?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this because the situation in Gaza is simply intolerable and getting worse. And we are working with other leaders urgently to bring about rapid and unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is desperately needed, obviously alongside the release of hostages. And to get back to a ceasefire, and that work is going on through my team 24/7. I do believe that is the initial action that needs to be taken, but I still fundamentally believe that however remote it may seem at the moment, the pathway to a two-state solution is the only way for settled and lasting peace in the Middle East, and we will continue with our allies to pursue that path.
What happened?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Found in my constituency, Durdle Door is one of the most iconic bathing sites in all the country. So last Friday, I was joined at Durdle Door by my honourable friends, the members for Bournemouth East, Bournemouth West, Poole, and most importantly, Ron, the local seal, to test the water quality at Durdle Door. Currently, water quality testing at bathing sites is only monitored from mid-May to September, which puts the health of all water users at risk who could be potentially swimming in pollution or sewage. With this in mind, will the Prime Minister work with me and my honourable friends to introduce all year-round testing at popular bathing sites such as Durdle Door?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone enjoying our beautiful beaches, lakes and rivers is entitled to know that the water is clean and safe. That's why we're modernising outdated bathing water regulations, including more regular monitoring sites to reflect local demand. And after years of failure by the party opposite, we're acting through our plan for change through new powers to tackle pollution, including banning bonuses, jail terms for law-breaking bosses and real-time monitors of every sewage outlet.
Ms Saville Roberts.
This Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to lead a country where we pull together and walk into the future as neighbours and as communities, not as strangers. And the loss of control of migration by the last government put all of that at risk. And that's why we're fixing the system based on principles of control, selection and fairness.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Council tax is the most regressive and unfair tax in this country. It has become a tax on deprivation. The less affluent an area, the more you pay. The greater your need, the more you pay. A bandy property in Westminster pays just £1,017 a year. In Hartlepool, it's £2,495 a year. For a Band H property, the difference between those two areas is £3,000. It is hammering people in towns like Hartlepool. Does the Prime Minister agree that this unfairness cannot continue, and will he commit to addressing this inequality once and for all?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He's been a dedicated campaigner on this for a very long time. As he knows, 14 years of mismanagement by the party opposite left councils on their knees with a total failure to improve and update how councils are funded. Through £69 billion of funding this year and the upcoming multi-year settlement, the first in over a decade, will give councils far greater certainty and stability. Our detailed funding review will create a fairer system to make sure his constituents see strong, affordable local services.
Wendy Moore.
Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister prefers to take to the international stage, back here at home, Labour's Birmingham bin strike is now in its 10th week. Rubbish is still piled on the streets and recycling goes uncollected. And the reputation of the West Midlands is being trashed. His ministers continue to wash their hands of this. His mayor doesn't even want to talk about it. So will the Prime Minister come to the West Midlands and sort this out? Because at the moment, it's only the squeaky blinders that are winning.
Prime Minister.
Well, further evidence, Mr. Speaker, of the decline of the Tory party when they say that going to Ukraine at the weekend to try and secure peace for Ukraine and for Europe and the security and defence of Europe is somehow the wrong priority. That conflict has already massively impacted people in this country through the cost of living crisis and energy. Ukraine, Europe and we deserve peace and to live in peace. Mr. Speaker, on dealing with the bin strikes is the priority, We continue to call on Unite to suspend the strike immediately and bring the disruption to an end. We are supporting the Council to ramp up the cleaning operation and now collecting over 1,100 tonnes of waste every day, and continue to offer our support so the backlog doesn't reappear.
Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I visited Sacred Heart Primary School in Hyndburn, where the excellent teachers expressed their frustration at the current SEND system. One wonderful boy who, despite being non-verbal and requiring personal support, has been waiting for over 18 months for an EHCP, and there is a risk now that he won't get a place in a school for the year ahead that suits his needs. How will the Prime Minister ensure that the voices of parents and children are at the heart of the SEND reforms that the government will bring forward?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. She's a powerful champion on this issue. Our principle is that every young person with special education needs should receive the right support to succeed. We've immediately announced an additional £1 billion for high needs funding, including almost £20 million for schools in Lancashire. We will support special schools and deliver truly inclusive places and expertise in mainstream schools to help every child thrive.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We at Reform, a party that is alive and kicking, very much enjoyed your speech on Monday. You seem to be learning a very great deal from us. But can I encourage you, please, to go further as a matter of national security? As a matter of national security. Over the weekend, an illegal immigrant from Iran, who we believe came by boat, was arrested in the north of England on serious charges of terrorism. Since the speech on Monday, 1,000 young, undocumented young males have crossed the English Channel. Does the Prime Minister agree now is the time to declare the situation in the English Channel as a national security emergency?
It wasn't my speech, it was the Prime Minister's.
Mr. Speaker, the situation is serious. The last government lost control of the borders. We are taking powers. The Borders Bill, precisely to his point, the Borders Bill is the first bill to give terrorism-like powers to law enforcement, precisely so that we can get in before the crimes are committed, before people get to this country. That's why this is the most far-reaching provision ever for law enforcement to defend and secure our borders. And that's why it is extraordinary that he, of all people, voted against it. And sooner or later he's going to have to explain it.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since my election, I've been championing and backing our country's plumbers, builders, electricians and all trades. These are not the people just building Britain, but holding all of our communities together. That's why I've been campaigning for tougher sentencing and action on tool theft, and for the real cost of this crime to be recognised. I want to firstly thank everyone in the sector who's backed the campaign, because together we've shown that the message is clear. 14 years of government neglect. It's time for action and change. Will the Prime Minister work with me, the Secretary of State for Justice, and myself to include my bill as we review sentencing and justice so the punishment finally fits this crime?
Can I commend my honourable friend? She's led the campaign to highlight the devastating impact of these crimes. Mr. Speaker, for hard-working small businesses, the theft of tools isn't just a violation. It can mean thousands of pounds of potential work lost, with a huge impact to businesses and to families. We're investing over £1.2 billion extra into policing, with 13,000 new neighbourhood police to focus on crimes that impact on communities the most. And I pay tribute to my honourable friend, and I know the Justice Secretary will look at the details carefully.
Andrew Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Whether you agree with the Prime Minister's net zero targets or not, I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree that you won't achieve them, or he won't achieve them, without taking people with him. The cabling corridor, substation corridor for the Morgan and Morecambe offshore wind farm is now one of the most objected to national energy infrastructure projects in the country. And what is angering myself and thousands of others is that there is a perfectly alternative cabling route further up the coastline, which would actually have local economic benefit, would be more cost effective as a whole life cycle project, and could connect to existing national grid infrastructure. But no one is listening. So will the Prime Minister now listen and pause the planning inquiry for the existing application and ask the Department to consider and cost the alternative route to avoid untold devastation to our coastline and countryside?
Can I thank him for his question? As he will know, the Secretary of State is going through a quasi-judicial exercise, and therefore I'm limited in what I can say, but let me do the best I can within those constraints, because the project is going through its examination, where interested parties can put forward their views on the application and should do so. And more broadly, as we drive forward renewable projects, the planning process is designed to ensure impacts are carefully considered. Thank you.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom has rightly helped arm Ukraine with modern, effective capability, and we're sending them some £4.5 billion this year. But after decades of relying on the peace dividend, our own forces are ill-equipped for modern warfare. With colleagues interested in defence technology, I'm developing a proposal for a joint UK-Ukraine production hub on British soil. This would support Ukraine while also modernising our own forces at warfighting scale and creating the jobs and know-how needed to rearm and stay secure. Will the Prime Minister use his good offices to help support this proposal?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable and gallant friend is right that our ironclad support for Ukraine should go hand in hand with firing up our own defence industries. And that means well-paid, secure jobs right across the country, including in Plymouth, and strengthening national security. We reiterated our support for Ukraine in Kyiv last weekend, and I'm proud that British industries are playing their part supporting Ukraine against Russia's illegal invasion. I'll make sure that he meets the relevant minister to discuss his proposal.
John Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in the real world are disgusted by the Energy Secretary's obsessive pursuit of net zero at any cost. The Scottish Borders is under attack, with solar farms the size of towns, massive wind farms, and now mega pylons scarring unspoilt landscapes. Nobody sensible supports his crazed crank policies that will put jobs at risk and rip up farmland. So when will the Prime Minister step in and stop his Energy Secretary throwing taxpayers' money at this nonsense?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, only a few years ago, dealing with the climate challenge was a shared endeavour across this House. And it's yet further evidence of how far his party has fallen, that they cannot see the significance and importance of tackling one of the major challenges of our time. I think we should rise to that challenge, not be defeatist about it. And it's further evidence, as far as I can see, that the Tory project is just finished.
Jake Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Male suicide is a tragic epidemic in our country. Each week, almost 100 men take their own lives, and suicide is the biggest killer of men aged under 50. In my constituency, I'm working with Andy's Man Club in Maltby, the learning community in Dinnington, and Better Today in Kiverton Park to try and raise awareness about the fantastic groups who offer support for men in the most difficult circumstances. Will the Prime Minister use this opportunity to support the campaign that we are undertaking in my constituency, and also reassure those groups and my constituents that mental health services for men will be a priority for his government?
Can I thank him for raising this crucial issue? And across the House, I know members will have their own personal and tragic experiences of suicide. Mr. Speaker, we've launched a call for evidence on our men's health strategy, which will improve men's health in all parts of the country, including tackling devastatingly high suicide rates. We're also investing £26 million in new mental health crisis centres, funding talking therapies for 380,000 more people and recruiting 8,500 more mental health workers.
Bobby Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The plans to upgrade St Helier Hospital, including the delivery of a new specialist emergency care building, have been put back by 10 years. Now, I'm talking with the Trust about a way to bring all or part of those plans forward, but in the meantime, they have a very real fear that some of the buildings on the existing estate are at risk of catastrophic failure before the decade is out. So can the government reassure me that they'll work with the local trust on a plan to maintain and adapt the existing estate to ensure that St Helier Hospital can survive all the way through to the major works being complete?
The honourable member's constituents have been badly let down by the previous government's empty promises, which were never going to deliver. We put the new hospitals programme on a sustainable financial footing, increasing the NHS capital budget to record levels so we can address the backlog of critical maintenance, repairs and upgrades. And I'll make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the particular case.
Melanie on.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes is the renewable energy capital of England, delivering homegrown, secure energy and boosting local skills. And over 12,000 people are employed in a clean energy job in Greater Lincolnshire. But these jobs are now under threat from Reform's new mayor, who has declared war on renewables, putting livelihoods at risk. What steps will the Prime Minister take to protect jobs by supporting the supply chain and delivery of renewable projects?
Mr Speaker, she's a superb champion for energy security, driving down bills and the good secure jobs that renewables offer. And the parties opposite are climate defeatists. Anti-jobs, anti-growth, anti-business and anti-investment. And they should go and peddle their policies to the tens of thousands of people, working people in this country, working in renewables every single day. They don't think that Britain has the skills, and they would deny us incredible opportunities. We're focused on securing billions in investment, creating tens of thousands of jobs and taking us off the roller coaster of an international fossil fuels.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A constituent of mine, Victor Franklin, was made severely disabled after a savage dog attack left him with multiple amputations. Will the Prime Minister explain why pensioners like Victor, who become severely disabled after retirement, are excluded from claiming personal independence payments and are instead limited to the lesser support of attendance allowance? And will he commit to reviewing this unfair rule?
Prime Minister.
Can I extend my thoughts to Victor and the awful circumstances that she describes, which must be extremely challenging. We do have to reform the system that we've got. It's not working. I think there's a general agreement about that, but the principles have to be clear, that we protect and secure those that need that protection and security. We help those who can work into work, and those who can work should work. But we have to reform the system that we've got to make it a better system, because what we've got doesn't work.
Nigel Cuttiska.
Mr Speaker. Every week I meet families in Barking and Dagenham who tell me that they worry about paying for their bills because they are on a 0-hour contract. My constituents want the chance to work hard in a secure job, earn a decent wage and to have dignity in their workplace. As Labour plans for change delivers the biggest uplift in workers' rights in a generation, does the Prime Minister agree with me that Reform MPs working and voting against our employment rights bill show that they are no friend of workers in this country?
She's absolutely right. Let's be clear what the parties opposite voted against. Stronger statutory sick pay, they voted against. The right to guaranteed hours, they voted against. Protection from unfair dismissal, they voted against. Stronger protection for pregnant mothers, they voted against. Insecure work, a package worth £600 to the poorest workers, they voted against. Mr Speaker, we're backing British workers. They vote against them at every turn.
Adam Dance.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Maternity services in Yeovil are due to shut on Monday after a deeply flawed CQC inspection in January and be moved to Musgrove Park Hospital in Taunton, which does not have the capacity for an extra 1,300 births a year. While the closure is initially for 6 months, I've received no guarantee it will open again. This creates huge fear. Will the Prime Minister or relative minister agree to meet with me and colleagues in the South West to stop this decision?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful to him for raising this issue, which must be of concern. I'm not across the details of it, I'm afraid, at this stage, but I will make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to get to the bottom of the issue that he's described.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Point of order, James Richards.
Mr Speaker, at Prime Minister's questions, the Leader of the Opposition claimed that unemployment had risen by 10% since the last general election. That figure is completely and utterly incorrect. It's no wonder that George Osborne, a former Conservative Chancellor, says she's got no economic plan if she can't even get basic statistics right. Will she return to the House and correct the record?
It's not up to the Chair for the accuracy of what Will the member state? What I would say is you've corrected the record in your opinion, and we'll leave it at that for now. Bench changeover. Come to the urgent question. Adrian Ramsey.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for FCDO if he will make a statement on the UK's assessment of the likelihood of genocide in Gaza.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, alongside partners, the UK convened a meeting of the UN Security Council in response to the intolerable civilian suffering and humanitarian need in Gaza. As I told this House yesterday, Israel's denial of aid is appalling. Tons of food are currently sitting, rotting, at the Gaza-Israel border, blocked from reaching people who are starving. Israeli ministers have said Israel's decision to block this aid is a pressure lever. This is cruel and it is indefensible. Overnight, yet more Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes. This must end. The message yesterday was clear. The world demands Israel stop and change course immediately. With our allies, we are telling the government of Israel, lift the block on aid entering Gaza now. Enable the UN and all humanitarians to save lives now. We need an immediate ceasefire now. Humanitarian aid must never be used as a political tool or military tactic, and the UK will not support any aid mechanism that seeks to deliver political or military objectives or puts vulnerable civilians at risk. The International Court of Justice case on genocide is ongoing, Mr. Speaker. We support the ICJ. We support its independence. The ICJ issued a set of provisional measures in this case, and we support those measures. Israel has an obligation to implement them. It is the UK government's long-standing position that any formal determination as to whether genocide has occurred is a matter for a competent court and not for governments or non-judicial bodies. The UK is fully committed to upholding our responsibilities under domestic and international law, and we have at all times acted in a manner consistent with our legal obligations, including under the Genocide Convention. The devastation from this conflict must end, Mr. Speaker. Our complete focus is on lifting Israeli restrictions on aid, on freeing the hostages, on protecting civilians, and on restoring the ceasefire. We will work urgently with our allies and partners on further pressure to make Israel change course.
Adrian Ramsey.
Mr. Speaker, overnight, the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher warned that a genocide was possible in Gaza. 1 in 5 people faces starvation. The entire population is facing high levels of acute food insecurity. In Gaza, Gaza North, Deir al-Balah, Khan Yunis and Rafah, there is a risk of famine. And there's one primary cause, Israel's aid blockade since the 2nd of March. The Security Council were told that civilians in Gaza have again been forcibly displaced and confined into ever-shrinking spaces, with 80% of the territory either within Israeli militarised zones or under displacement orders. Israeli airstrikes on the European hospital in Gaza yesterday killed 28 people, with further reports of at least 48 deaths overnight from strikes elsewhere. So can he tell us whether the FCDO has conducted any recent assessment of its own on the risk that the Israeli authorities are committing genocide. Last night, the UK's ambassador to the UN rightly called on Israel to lift the restrictions and ensure a return to delivery of aid in Gaza in line with humanitarian principles and international law. But this is not enough. Notwithstanding the government's position that it's for judicial bodies to make a determination, what is the Minister's response to the latest UN assessment that genocide is possible in Gaza? Can he confirm whether the UK stands by the obligation to prevent duty in the Genocide Convention? Parliament needs to know whether the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator's assessment will lead to a shift in the UK government's position. Why is it that when the horrors increase, the UK government's position stays the same? And lastly, to echo the words in Tom Fletcher's briefing, will you act decisively to prevent genocide and ensure respect for international humanitarian law, or will you instead repeat the empty words, "We did all we could"?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for asking these important questions. The testimony of the Emergency Relief Coordinator, the very most senior official in the entire humanitarian system in the world, last night at the UN Security Council meeting that we called with our allies, is clearly incredibly important. And I can confirm to the honourable member that we do abide by our international law obligations, including to the Genocide Convention, and we consider in all of our IHL assessments, which are ongoing, all of the relevant tests, and we will continue to do so. The honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, asks important questions, questions which have echoed in this chamber yesterday and throughout this long and painful conflict. This government has taken steps, whether it's restoring funding, suspending arms exports, working with our partners in the UN and elsewhere, but clearly we are in a situation today where nobody in this House would wish to be, nobody on these benches, and I'm sure nobody on the benches opposite. We will need to take more and more action until we see the change that we need, but the central question, as I've told this House repeatedly, the central question is that aid is not being allowed into Gaza. While it is not allowed into Gaza, there is nothing that can be done to get the aid at the scale and in the manner necessary to save Palestinian life. And it is on that point that we called the Security Council, and on that point we will continue to act.
Can I just remind people not to use you, because I'm not responsible for some of those statements. Right. Andy MacDonald, you put also a UKIP.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has repeatedly said that we do everything to observe international law. Will he please accept that there is a growing body of opinion that says the UK is not doing that? We're not complying with our obligations. And we are not doing so if we continue to supply parts to the F-35 programme. These are the weapons that are dropping on children in Gaza. We cannot say that we're observing the Genocide, Geneva Conventions and Rome Statutes if we continue to supply those goods. And he talks about doing all that we could. If that's the case, then why on earth are we not making it abundantly clear to Israel that trading with them is not an option whilst this continues? So the answer to the question, is he doing all that he could? Because there's many people in this place and beyond who think we are not.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. I know his commitment to these issues over a long period of time. I don't accept the premise of his question. Whether or not we abide by our legal obligations is indeed a question that will be determined by the courts. It's being determined by the courts this week. And so I will leave it to the courts to make judgments on our obligations. We are taking all of the steps that we can to bring this conflict to a close. He mentions the vital questions of the F-35 programme. I know this House understands the significance of that programme, not just in Europe, but across the world. The carve-out that we have put in place, we have done so on the basis of robust legal advice which is being tested in the courts this week. We must abide by our obligations to our allies. We are not selling F-35s directly to the Israeli authorities. We continue to supply a global spares pool, which is necessary for the continued function of the F-35 programme, which has critical importance to European security. We make these judgments calmly and soberly, and we will continue to do so.
Shadow Minister Wendell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation in the Middle East continues to cause concern. That's why, on this side of the House, we've been clear we need to see the return of the hostages and a lasting ceasefire. And while we welcome the release of Eden Alexander, there are still 58 hostages held in Gaza by the Iranian-backed terrorists. Those who are still alive are being held in the most dreadful and appalling conditions, without access to aid and medicines. And what they and their families have been going through for approaching 600 days is unimaginable. They must be released as a matter of urgency. So can the Minister give an update on the diplomatic steps being taken by the government to secure the release of the remaining hostages? And what is Britain contributing to those efforts? This conflict would have been over long ago had Hamas released them, and the House should not be in any doubt that Hamas and their Iranian sponsors are committed to wiping out the State of Israel. So can the Minister tell us what steps are being taken with international partners to deal with the threat to peace, security and stability posed by Iran? We have constantly asked for a strategy to tackle Iran, so when will this come forward? The government has shared our view that Hamas can have no role in the future governance of Gaza. So can we have an update on the practical steps the government is taking to secure this outcome and end of the misery that Hamas is inflicting on Gaza and the threat they pose to Israel? Mr. Speaker, we've debated aid access to Gaza on several occasions, including in recent days. So can the Minister tell us exactly how much UK-funded aid, both directly and indirectly through multilateral organisations, is waiting to enter Gaza, and what a breakdown of that aid is? The government has known for a number of months about the concerns Israel has about the delivery of aid to Gaza and aid diversion. So can the Minister today explain what discussions have taken place with Israel and what practical solutions ministers have offered to support the delivery of aid that addresses their concerns? And has the Minister been directly engaged in the discussions that have taken place with Israel and the US over alternative ways to get aid into Gaza? Does he have a view on this, and will the UK be participating? We have also been clear that while we continue to press for humanitarian aid and accountability, we do not consider the actions in Gaza to constitute genocide. This case brought by South Africa to the International Court of Justice is not helping in advance.
Please, just can we please stick to the time? It was almost a minute over. We've got to work within the timescales. Please, if we can time speeches, lots of members need to get in. We've got to support each other. I think the Minister's got enough to go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, of course, welcome, as the Foreign Secretary did yesterday, the release of Eden Alexander. I know this whole House thinks of those hostages who remain in Hamas captivity. I have been in direct contact with American officials involved in that release, and it is a very welcome development. We are focused on ensuring that a future for Gaza has no role for Hamas. We are working as part of the Arab Reconstruction Plan in order to try and achieve that. The Honourable Lady asks an important question about what proportion of British aid is unable to get in to Gaza at the moment. Of course, for the last almost 2 months, the horrendous answer is 100%. But even before that, there was very significant restrictions on the aid that we wish to get into Gaza. I saw for myself the items that were unable to cross from Al Arish into Rafah, so the proportions will be very high, but I will see with my officials whether or not I can break it down in greater detail for her.
Suzanne Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Slow and agonising breaths, scared, crying, emaciated bodies fighting for every heartbeat. Death by 1,000 cuts for the children and for the parents who were watching their babies deliberately being starved to death. Almost 1 million children at risk of famine and death in Gaza. Those who have stood by and allowed this to happen should hold their heads in shame. I call on this government to sanction Israeli officials until the blockade is lifted, because if we do not act now, this will be on us.
I know the strength of feeling behind my honourable friend's words. I'm sure she is aware of the findings of the IPC report on Monday, which delineates in great detail the precise suffering that is being felt because of a lack of food and nutrition. We are horrified by those findings. The need for action could not be more urgent.
Monica Harding, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel's continuing blockade of Gaza, now exceeding 70 days, is utterly unacceptable. Will the government now recognise that the blockade constitutes a clear violation of international law? The government must respect whatever determination the ICJ reaches regarding genocide. There are already clear obligations on the government to prevent genocide in Gaza, arising from the ICJ's January 2024 order. Has the government taken any steps to meet these obligations? Will the government commit today to banning the export of all UK arms to Israel? Will the government reconsider sanctions on extremist Israeli ministers like Bezalel Smotrich, who called for Gaza to be destroyed? Will the government commit to an immediate recognition of a Palestinian state? And as the UN's British relief chief told the Security Council yesterday, if we have not done all we could to end the violence in Gaza, we should fear the judgment of future generations. Does the Minister agree?
Mr. Speaker, these responsibilities weigh heavily on me and every member of the government and the Foreign Office team. But let us not forget what this government has done, whether it is restoring funding to UNRWA, suspending arms exports in the way that we described, whether it's providing 129 million in humanitarian aid and then being one of the loudest voices in trying to ensure that enters, whether it's working with Jordan to fly medicines into Gaza, Egypt to treat medically evacuated civilians, Project Pure Hope to help Gazan children in the UK, Kuwait to support vulnerable children through UNICEF. We are taking steps. We take the judgments of the ICJ incredibly seriously. But I cannot pretend to the House that the events in the occupied Palestinian territories of recent days are acceptable, and we will continue to take every step we can to get a change of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow is the 77th anniversary of the 1948 Nakba, which saw hundreds of thousands of Palestinians displaced from their homes. This still continues today, and the UN Security Council has said action is now required to prevent genocide. A key step to a peaceful two-state solution would be recognizing Palestinian statehood, something Israel is trying to prevent. So with 147 countries recognizing Palestinian statehood, Minister, is now not the right time for the UK to do so too?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the question of recognition of a Palestinian state is one obviously of vital importance. We want to do so as a contribution to a more stable region. We can see the serious and immediate threats to the viability of Palestinian life, and that is what we are focused on in these most urgent of days.
Third, the House, Edward Lee.
I've been a member of the Conservative Friends of Israel for over 40 years, longer than anybody here. And Hamas is a brutal terrorist organisation that hides people, their own fighters, under hospitals. But it's frankly unacceptable to recklessly bomb a hospital. It's unacceptable to starve a whole people. Is the Minister aware that many friends of Israel worldwide, notwithstanding narrow legal definitions, are asking this moral question: when is genocide not genocide?
Mr. Speaker, I have heard in recent weeks a series of very powerful interventions from the benches opposite, and I take them seriously with the weight that they hold, particularly from the Father of the House and my neighbour in Lincolnshire. We will not move towards making determinations from dispatch boxes on questions of legal determination, but that does not mean we will wait, Mr. Speaker. The preliminary judgments of the ICJ and the provisional measures that they set out are important, and we will abide by them.
Helena Donovan.
Speaker. As the Minister has said, the situation is intolerable, with 1 in 5 Gazans facing starvation, and as he has also said, the use of aid as a weapon of war by Israel is inexcusable. The continued firing of rockets by Hamas and the continued detention of hostages is also inexcusable, and it all must end. So I welcome the UK, with our international allies, calling an urgent briefing on this situation at the UN Security Council, and there the UN humanitarian chief was clear in his warning about the dire consequences of this continuing. So can the Minister tell me what steps this Labour government is taking to get more aid in, to get the hostages out and bring about the ceasefire and two-state solution that we all in this House so desperately want to see?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, who I know has been long committed to these issues and used to be an aid worker herself. She's a doughty advocate on these points. We remain absolutely committed to a two-state solution. We are focusing all of our diplomatic efforts on ensuring that the current approach is changed, that we return to a diplomatic solution, that we have a ceasefire, the release of hostages, and a move back to that two-state solution that, as she so rightly puts it, is vitally important.
Oliver Dowden. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The situation in Gaza is clearly intolerable, and Israel does have to find a way of getting aid in safely and without diversion. But would the Minister agree with me? We need to be very careful about the use of the word genocide, and that we don't devalue this word. This is used to describe the systematic and deliberate murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany. We must question, and I do not believe that a war designed to release hostages and remove a terrorist threat and against a terrorist that hides amongst the civilian population crosses that threshold.
It's the long-standing position of governments of all stripes that it's for international courts to make determinations of this nature, and we will abide by our obligations under international humanitarian law.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the reality is that since the 2nd of March, no food or medical aid supplies have reached over 2.3 million Palestinians. The reality is that many of us from across this House have attended many statements, Westminster Hall debates, submitted parliamentary questions, asking the government around this really critical issue. The reality is that those hostages still remain in captivity and they need to be released. But the reality is that by using aid to punish so many people is wrong. Does the Minister agree with me that under the Genocide Convention, the UK, as a state party, has an obligation not only to prevent and punish genocide, but also to avoid actions which may assist or enable genocidal acts?
My honourable friend asks important questions both about aid access and the nature of aid delivery. And I want to be very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the UK will not support any aid mechanism that seeks to deliver political or military objectives or put vulnerable people at risk. The obligations under international humanitarian law and international law more broadly are clear, and they fall on Israel as the occupying power, and they must abide by them.
Mike Martin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, very few things in politics, particularly international politics, are black or white. However, this is one of those issues. The Israeli government is using collective punishment of the civilian Palestinian population, and this is illegal under international law. In particular, it contravenes the Geneva Conventions, which Israel is a party to. My question is, does the Minister think that the British government has lost its moral and legal compass in continuing its tacit support for Israel?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have set out some of what this government has done. I could continue for some time, but let me be clear, because the honourable gentleman rightly points out the absolutely appalling nature of any attempt to try and weaponise aid, to try and use incendiary language, which is clearly in breach of international legal obligations. We have condemned from this dispatch box much of that language. Some of that language was repeated by the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, and I want to take the opportunity again to say the British government absolutely condemns that inflammatory language, will continue to do so, and makes our views known in the most forceful possible way with the Israeli government.
Abdisan Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The international community have failed to stop Israel's impunity. We have collectively failed to act on the violations as they are committed and to hold Israel to account. And in our collective failure, Palestinians in Gaza face collective punishment. Israeli ministers' statements of stopping humanitarian aid as one of their main levers of pressure is not only cruel and indefensible, they are explicit admissions of violating international law. Minister, I hear our condemnations, but I see no action. Why are we still sending arms? Why are we not sanctioning ministers? The UN have said what many know to be true. We, as a signatory to the Geneva Convention, have a legal obligation to prevent a genocide from taking place. Minister, when will we act?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the member for Sheffield Central, my friend, is a very forceful advocate on these questions, and she points to failure, and I recognise that failure, that we are still so many months on, so many days on, with the people of Gaza, the people of West Bank, and of course the hostages in the most distressing possible circumstances. I won't comment from this dispatch box on sanctions as she would expect, but I can assure her that we will be working urgently with our allies and partners on further pressure to make Israel change course.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep up with the slaughter in Gaza, the brutality and cruelty in the West Bank, and starvation as a policy. And the crimes come daily. Crimes such as the recent killing of Mohammed Bardawil, one of only 3 key eyewitnesses to the slaughter of rescue workers just a few weeks ago, their bodies being buried in shallow graves. It's clear to everybody that crimes are being committed daily. Now, as a number of members have pointed out, the UK is a party to international agreements which provide for a positive obligation to act to prevent genocide, torture, to protect the rights of other people. And we have an obligation as a member of the Security Council of the United Nations and as a state party to the Geneva Conventions to promote peace and security. So what advice has the Minister taken as to his own liability in this regard, which will attach to him as a decision maker? And has the government received advice as to whether the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, or indeed any senior officials or previous ministers may be exposed when the reckoning comes?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as you would expect, I wouldn't discuss internal legal advice in this chamber, whether that applies to me or other ministers of the government. I'd reassure the honourable gentleman that right across the government we understand the gravity of the situation. We understand the weight that now falls to us to try and ensure changes from a trajectory which is diabolical. We will continue to use our role in the Security Council at the G7 and as part of the E3 as we did yesterday, and that action will not stop.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Minister still refuses to address the central issue. Our obligation to prevent genocide under the Rome Statute has already been triggered by the ample evidence in front of us of Israeli war crimes in Gaza. So I ask the Minister, in the week marking 77 years since the Nakba, how many more times will he come to this chamber with just words? Words that do nothing. We need action. And let us be clear, it's not a case of if, but when he will end the UK's complicity in arming a state accused of genocide against the Palestinians, and when he will finally impose widespread sanctions on Israel. And I say this to the Minister, history will judge his delay.
Well said.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just like to remind the House of the decisions that we took last year And we have discussed the question of the F-35 global spares pool, where the basis on of which we've made a carve-out is clear and been debated many times. But let me be clear, aside from that carve-out, we took an assessment, we took a solemn duty on becoming the government to make an assessment which did not appear to have been made about a serious risk of potential breaches of international humanitarian law. We then suspended arms export licenses where those weapons could be used in such conduct. That means in Gaza, that means in West Bank, that means in relation to all of the areas where those risks accrued. We took far-reaching action. That action is still in place. We continue to conduct those assessments. I can understand why many members may feel frustrated about the F-35 carve-out. Perhaps they feel frustrated too that we will continue to sell arms which cannot be used, in our view, which could not risk a violation, as according to the assessment much discussed here. But we think it is right that we do continue to, for example, provide body armour that might be used by NGOs in Gaza, that we do provide part of the supply chain that could end up in the hands of NATO allies. We have taken far-reaching action on arms. That is important work which we are proud of.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have just returned from the High Court this morning, where his government's lawyers will argue when defending the continued supply of F-35 components that, and I quote, "The evidence available does not support a finding of genocide, and certainly there is a tenable view that no genocide has occurred or is occurring." So, Minister, it appears your government, whether it is told you or not, has already made a determination. And that would explain, I believe, why there is no intention to have an independent assessment of whether a genocide is likely, because the government knows that were they so to do, they would be revealing an unpalatable truth, a truth which would then prevent them from supplying Israel with the weapons that it needs to continue its merciless onslaught. It really is as grubby as that, Minister, isn't it?
Good question.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not as grubby as that. Almost every word of that. Well, firstly, clearly there is an ongoing legal case where we are not going to litigate that case in this chamber, as you would expect. A judicial review on the F-35 element is happening over these days. The judge will find on it, and we will respect that judgment. On the question, let me be absolutely clear to the honourable gentleman. We continue to conduct assessments across our full range of responsibilities under international law. It is simply not true to suggest we are avoiding making any internal assessment in order to justify policy. We continue to assess these things carefully. We do it on a rolling basis. We do it regularly. What he has said is simply not true.
Paul Wall.
Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his personal commitment to this cause, and can I thank the UK Government for putting this on the record at the UN yesterday as a matter of extreme urgency. But can I also put to him directly the challenge from Tom Fletcher yesterday, the UN's aid chief. He said, for those killed and whose voices are silenced, what more evidence do you need now? Will you act decisively to prevent genocide? What's his answer to that question?
I thank my honourable friend who has been committed to these issues ever since he came to this place, and I know before as well. Tom Fletcher's words are important. As I said earlier, he is the most senior member of the humanitarian community in the world. What he said at the meeting that we called yesterday is very, very important. We have not waited for the meeting yesterday. We have not waited for determinations of international courts to take action. Let us not forget what we have done, whether it is in relation to UNRWA, whether it is in relation to the arms suspension, whether it's the sanctions on Israeli settlers, whether it is our convening role in the United Nations Security Council. We will continue to take action. Mr. Fletcher rightly asks for decisive action. Has our action yet been decisive? Clearly, Madam Deputy Speaker, it has not. Hostages remain detained. Palestinians continue to suffer. A two-state solution feels very distant indeed. We have not yet had the decisive effect that we would wish to see, and we will continue to act until we do.
Sir Julian Lewis.
As well as
raping, kidnapping and killing civilians on October the 7th for its own sake. Hamas had a strategy of trying to prevent further peace deals between Israel and its Arab neighbours by provoking a massive, frenzied reaction to the atrocities. Does the Minister share my dismay that that brutal strategy seems to be succeeding?
I do share his dismay that events in the region since October the 7th, since the horrific actions of October the 7th, have involved an enormous amount of bloodshed, an enormous amount of civilian suffering. This government hopes that we will yet see a day where there is a stable region with normal diplomatic relations amongst all of its members, with a two-state solution, with two states living securely and safely side by side, and I regret that that feels such a distant prospect.
Nasha. Madam Deputy Speaker. 77 years on since the Nakba, Israel's illegal occupation eats away at the land, and now we have, and let me just repeat the word loud and clear, genocide, plausible genocide, ICJ, plausible genocide, ICC, plausible genocide, Amnesty International, plausible genocide, United Nations. What I want to know is, since this week's news, what I'm asking the Minister is what new assessments have been done and how often are they done to determine what else and what other actions we can do to stop what is happening to the Gazans, to the children, to the civilians, to the aid workers, to make sure that we can get aid in. What other pressures and levers can this government use, not just from our country, but as a bloc with international partners and others, in addition to recognising Palestine? Surely that's long overdue.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend asks important questions about assessments. They are made regularly, they're made on a rolling basis, they're made in light of new events. But I want to reassure her that we do not wait for assessments, nor do we wait for final legal determinations before taking action. I've listed some of that action already, and I can reassure her that we will work urgently with our allies and partners on further pressure to make Israel change course.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Even if the Minister can't condemn what is obviously an act of genocide, could he tell us in clear terms, are we still supplying parts to F-35 jets that do find their way to Israel, that do take part in the bombardment of Gaza? And are there still flights going from RAF Akrotiri over to Israel that are carrying military equipment that can be used either to bomb Gaza or to undertake military action against the people of the West Bank?
To be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, the decisions that we take on arms bind every part of the UK government. We are a government committed to abide by our international legal obligations, and we will continue to do so. Let me be clear again on the position on F-35s. Where F-35 sales were directly to Israel, and whether that is in relation to any particular component, those sales have been suspended. Where the sales are to a global pool, which is necessary for the continued function for the global F-35 programme, that has not been suspended. Where sales go to a global pool, it is clearly possible that they could find final destination in Israel. But to suspend our provision of components to the F-35 global pool would, in effect, be to render the F-35 programme inoperable. And it is on that basis that we set out the decisions that we took in September.
Andrew Pakes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I first put on record the relief I feel and many others about the release of Eden Alexander, and that I am saying a prayer for the other hostages. Every week, though, we come back to this House, the horror is greater. And for many of us this morning, woke up to a spokesperson for the Israeli government on the Today programme denying there is hunger happening in Gaza at all. But this House knows the reality. 10 weeks into a blockade of aid by the Israeli government, with 1 in 5 starving. He will know Madam Deputy Speaker, you will know and be aware that Tom Fletcher spoke passionately and with purpose yesterday at the UN about the collective failure of the UN to speak out previously. So can I ask the Minister, how do we avoid that this time? What more evidence do we need before we take action? What more action can be done?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier, the words of Tom Fletcher in the United Nations Security Council are important, and the IPC assessment that was produced on Monday, this is an assessment which is authoritative and thorough in its production, is the most important indication of needs in Gaza, and it should be taken seriously by everyone in this chamber and indeed by the Israeli government as well. We have, as my honourable friend who has been long committed to these issues, he knows the actions that we have taken so far. I will not speculate from this dispatch box other than to reassure the House that we will be working urgently with our allies and partners in order to ensure that Israel changes course.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there can be few now who would believe that the conduct of the Netanyahu government is anything other than gross and disproportionate. But does the Minister agree with me that the actor in the region that is unequivocally embarked on genocide is Hamas, with its self-avowed policy of killing Jews and eradicating the State of Israel?
Hear, hear. Well said, Dr. Andrew.
I have condemned Hamas, their despicable actions, their ugly and unacceptable rhetoric many times within this dispatch box, and I'm happy to do so again. It is the events of October the 7th, in all of their full horror, that triggered this most recent, most horrific round of violence.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So in addition to calling for the release of all hostages, Tom Fletcher, the UN Emergency Release Chief, also asked last night, what action will we tell future generations we each took to stop the 21st century atrocity to which we bear daily witness in Gaza? So what action will the government take if in the next 24 hours Israel doesn't allow aid into Gaza?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said throughout the course of the afternoon, the responsibilities weigh heavily on all of us. We do not view the situation as acceptable, and we will continue to take steps with our allies and partners to urge Israel to change course.
Mark Pritchard.
Madam Deputy Speaker, but as we all meet here in this rather grand palace of Westminster, the reality is, on the ground, that Palestinian children continue to die in the rubble. And is it not becoming clear that the central policy of the Israeli government seems more about protecting the political skin and life of the current Israeli Prime Minister rather than even saving the lives of the remaining Israeli hostages and the lives of Palestinians? I appeal to the British government to be again on the right side of history, the right side of the law, and the right side of moral judgment, and not to back one particular individual fighting for his political life back in Tel Aviv.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman speaks powerfully about the various views in Israel, and I won't speculate on the decision-making of others, but I listen very carefully to the words of Israeli hostages themselves when they have been released, what they make of the circumstances in Israel and what policy they think should be adopted. These are important voices and they echo loudly, I know, both in this chamber and across the world. We are clear, whatever the intentions, the international obligations under law on the Israeli government in relation to Gaza are indisputable, and we call today, as we have called every day, for them to abide by them.
John MacDonald.
Can I refer to my register of interest? I'm the Secretary of the National Union of Journalists Parliamentary Group. It's the anniversary of the murder by Israeli forces of Shireen Abu Akleh, the renowned journalist. Alongside her on that day was another journalist, Ali Samoudi. He was shot in the back. 2 weeks ago, the Israeli forces arrested, dragged him from his home, and Ali is now in detention somewhere, we do not know where. Under international law, journalists are afforded special protection. Can I ask the Minister now that we immediately take up with the Israeli government the question of where Ali Samoudi is and to seek everything we can do to secure his release, because all he was trying to do on behalf, and he works for CNN and Reuters and Al Jazeera, he was simply reporting on some of the war crimes that are taking place.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend raises incredibly important points about journalists, and I'm happy to take up the case in question. It is, of course, not just journalists. There are a whole set of people who are afforded special protections under international law: journalists, medical professionals, and indeed aid workers, many of whom that we have seen terrible incidents in Gaza. We have been pressing for accountability and justice on those questions, and I think in particular of the 3 British nationals killed in the World Central Kitchen incident more than a year ago, still waiting for justice.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister accept that where prima facie evidence of genocide exists, then awaiting the determination formally to be made by a court is not sufficient for us to meet the duty to prevent under the Genocide Convention?
In this case, the International Court of Justice is clearly the correct authority. It has issued a set of provisional measures, and we support those measures.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What we're seeing in Gaza is civilians starving to death. What we're seeing in Gaza is aid being held for 10 weeks, used as a weapon against innocent civilians. My constituents rightly are outraged by what they're seeing, and so am I. But whilst I welcome the Minister's words, what further actions can the government take to send a clearer message to Israel that this absolutely has to stop? Will the Minister look again at sanctions? Will he look at arms export licences? And will he recognise the state of Palestine?
I know my honourable friend's constituents will be concerned, as my constituents in Lincoln are concerned, as I know constituents right across the whole of the country are concerned. I have seen for my own eyes. I went to Al Arish to see British aid languishing while people desperately required it in Gaza. I saw the restrictions that were preventing aid getting in. I can assure her and her constituents that I have raised this personally in every way that I have thought able to try and make progress, and we will continue to do so. It is a source of continued personal frustration to me and frustration to the government that we have not been able to get aid back into Gaza in accordance with international law.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister have any information about how much aid is being held in Hamas-controlled warehouses in Gaza? And isn't the key to this desperate situation our links to Tehran? Because at the end of the day, it's the Iranian regime which pulls the strings of its puppet organisation Hamas, which is holding these hostages in conditions which are akin to torture.
So we take serious steps, Madam Deputy Speaker, to ensure that Hamas do not get access to aid. We supported a review into UNRWA's function. Mr. Fletcher set out yesterday in his remarks his view on the robustness of the United Nations provisions in order to try and prevent Hamas from stockpiling aid. And the findings of the IPC report on Monday are sobering reading about the circumstances in which Palestinian civilians are trying to live in Gaza. But I agree with him. Iran's malign role in the region must stop. They have supported Hamas, who have brought nothing but pain and misery, not just to Israelis, but to Palestinians as well.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, the Minister said, in response to a question I asked, that forcible movement of the Gazan population out of Gaza would be forcible displacement. Forcible displacement is a war crime, and that is what is already happening and is about to accelerate. So will he say in terms, as the head of UNRWA said this week, as the former Israeli Defence Minister Moshe Yalon said last week, that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza?
I will resist. My honourable friend is not just a doughty advocate for the Palestinian people, he's also a very much respected lawyer, so as he would expect, I'm not going to take the opportunity to make a determination at the dispatch box, but I will be clear again that forced displacement is clearly prohibited by international law, and we're clear on that at all times.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Amnesty International has described the 2-month siege in Gaza as genocide in action. Israel is, according to experts, deliberately creating conditions that could lead to the physical destruction of the Palestinian people, a pattern many may argue amounts to genocide. As a signatory to the Genocide Convention, does the Minister agree that the UK has a legal duty to act when there is a risk of genocide? And that duty to prevent begins not when genocide is confirmed, not when genocide is proven, not when genocide is established, but when there is a reasonable suspicion that it is occurring. The alarm bells are flashing red. The warning signs are there for the government to act. Will the government act?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out both the process of determination, the provisional measures that have been issued by the ICJ, and the government's determination not to wait until cases are concluded, but to take action now to try and preserve life.
Tahir Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Israel is intentionally starving Palestinians, and action should be taken to stop the war crimes and genocide. These are the words of a leading United Nations expert on right to food. Will the Minister tell us what is preventing, or what are they scared of, in terms of imposing sanctions on Israel? Because if this dispatch box is not where we can discuss this, certainly we can't discuss this behind closed doors.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the House has heard me talk about sanctions in the same terms over a long period of time, and I understand the frustration about not being able to speculate from this dispatch box about sanctions we might take. To do so would reduce their effectiveness and would frustrate the will of the House. We do keep all of these matters under close review. We are not scared in the performance of our duties. We are working all of the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, to try and practically change the situation on the ground, and that is to what all our efforts are directed.
Vicky Slade.
Deputy Speaker, barely a day goes by that I don't receive impassioned pleas from my constituents in Mid-Dorset Northpool begging for actions, not words, from this government. And many have shared their distress that we celebrated the defeat of tyranny on VE Day at the same time as the people of Gaza starve and are bombed to oblivion. They say that we are complicit in genocide. What does he say to my constituents? Because I agree with them, but I feel powerless to do any more than come here every time and say the same thing.
Madam Deputy Speaker, deeds, not words. Restoring funding to UNRWA, suspending arms licences, £129 million in humanitarian assistance to the occupied Palestinian territories, continued work at the UN Security Council, continued